Imagine waking up tomorrow with nothing. No mansion, no fleet of cars, no servants at your beck and call. Just the clothes on your back and the cold concrete beneath your feet. For most of us, it's a nightmare we'll never face. But for billionaire tech mogul Vincent Blackwood, it became a choice that would expose the most devastating truth of his life. What he discovered about the people closest to him would destroy everything he thought he knew about loyalty, friendship, and human nature itself. Vincent Blackwood wasn't just wealthy, he was untouchable. At 38, his tech empire SpanCorp had revolutionized how we connect. The company's social networking algorithms had changed the way 3 billion people communicated daily. His net worth? $4.7 billion. His Manhattan penthouse overlooked Central Park like a modern castle, and everyone who entered his world seemed to worship the ground he walked on. But wealth like Vincent's doesn't just buy material possessions, it creates an entire ecosystem of dependence. His personal staff included a chef who prepared meals for a family of one, a chauffeur who drove him 8 blocks to avoid walking, and a personal shopper who bought his clothes because Vincent claimed he was too busy to enter a store himself. 3 housekeepers maintained his 12,000-square-foot apartment, though Vincent used maybe 5 rooms on any given day. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had created technology that connected billions of strangers, yet he felt more isolated than ever before. Every conversation felt transactional. Every laugh seemed timed perfectly to his jokes. Every gesture of affection appeared calculated for maximum impact. Let me paint you a picture of Vincent's typical day, because understanding his world is crucial to understanding why he made the choice that would change everything. He woke at 5:30 each morning to a breakfast prepared exactly to his specifications: 2 eggs over easy, whole grain toast cut diagonally, fresh orange juice in a crystal glass that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His assistant Priya would arrive at 6:15 with a color-coded schedule that accounted for every minute of his day until he returned home 16 hours later. But here's what Vincent started noticing: people's behavior changed the moment they entered his presence. His doorman, usually gruff and dismissive to other residents, transformed into an obsequious servant the moment Vincent appeared. His barista, who barely acknowledged other customers, memorized Vincent's preferences and created elaborate foam art for his daily cappuccino. His personal trainer, who was known for pushing clients to their limits, suddenly became gentle and accommodating whenever Vincent expressed the slightest discomfort. Have you ever had someone change their personality completely when they found out about your job, your connections, or your bank account? Vincent experienced this phenomenon dozens of times each day. It was exhausting, and more importantly, it was isolating. The transformation was so consistent, so predictable, that Vincent began conducting informal experiments. He would mention being tired, and suddenly everyone around him would lower their voices and move more carefully. He would express interest in a restaurant, and within hours, 3 people would coincidentally recommend that exact establishment. He would wear a new watch or tie, and the compliments would flow like rehearsed lines from a play. But the most unsettling pattern involved his inner circle, the people who claimed to love him unconditionally. His younger brother Marcus had always been the artist in the family, the free spirit who supposedly cared nothing for material wealth. Yet Vincent noticed that Marcus's calls increased dramatically whenever Vincent's company stock performed well, and decreased during market downturns. The correlation was so precise, Vincent started tracking it on a spreadsheet. Then there was Antonio Rivera, Vincent's best friend since their freshman year at Stanford. They had lived together in a cramped dorm room, sharing instant noodles and dreams of changing the world. Antonio knew Vincent before the money, before the fame, before the empire. If anyone's loyalty was genuine, it had to be Antonio's, right? But even Antonio's behavior had subtle patterns that Vincent couldn't ignore. Antonio's restaurant chain had received $12 million in investment from Vincent over the years. Every time Antonio faced a financial crisis, Vincent would receive a call that started with nostalgic reminiscences about their college days, moved through careful updates about Antonio's current challenges, and concluded with Antonio reluctantly accepting Vincent's offer of help. The script never varied. Vincent's romantic relationships followed the same predictable pattern. Women who had never shown interest before suddenly found him irresistible once they learned about his wealth. They laughed at his jokes with theatrical enthusiasm, shared his interests with suspicious precision, and developed expensive tastes that required his financial support. Each relationship followed an identical trajectory: initial resistance to his money, gradual acceptance of small gifts, eventual expectation of grand gestures, and finally, explicit financial demands disguised as expressions of love. Subscribe now, because what Vincent discovered will make you question everyone in your own circle. Most people never get the opportunity to see behind the mask of wealth and power, but Vincent was about to conduct the most brutal social experiment of his lifetime. The breaking point came during Vincent's 38th birthday party, a lavish affair at his Hamptons estate. 50 of his closest friends and family members gathered to celebrate, and Vincent watched the evening unfold like a carefully orchestrated performance. The gifts were exquisite but impersonal, expensive items selected by assistants who had researched Vincent's interests with corporate precision. The toasts were eloquent but hollow, rehearsed speeches that praised his success, his generosity, his vision, but never mentioned his character, his struggles, or his humanity. But it was Marcus's toast that triggered Vincent's eventual decision. His brother stood before the assembled crowd and delivered a moving speech about family loyalty, about how blood was thicker than water, about how he would stand by Vincent's side no matter what challenges they faced. The guests applauded, Vincent smiled graciously, and everyone continued celebrating. What bothered Vincent wasn't what Marcus said, it was the timing. 3 days earlier, Vincent had overheard Marcus on the phone complaining to someone about the burden of maintaining a relationship with his wealthy brother. Marcus had described Vincent as needy, demanding, and exhausting. Yet here he was, publicly declaring unconditional loyalty to thunderous applause. That night, alone in his estate with the party cleanup happening around him, Vincent made a decision that would expose truths he wasn't prepared to face. He opened his private journal and wrote, "I need to know the truth. I need to see who these people really are when they think I have nothing left to give them." From his private journal, dated October 15th, "The people around me perform loyalty instead of feeling it. They demonstrate affection instead of experiencing it. They express gratitude instead of living it. I have become a walking bank account with a personality attached, and everyone knows exactly how much interest they can earn from their investment in our relationship." Vincent had built his fortune by understanding human behavior, by predicting how people would interact with technology and each other. Now he wanted to apply that same analytical approach to his personal life. But this experiment would require him to sacrifice everything that defined his identity: his wealth, his comfort, his security, even his name. The plan formed slowly over several weeks. Vincent would disappear from his own life completely, but he wouldn't actually leave the city. Instead, he would become someone else entirely, someone with no money, no connections, no power. He would observe his family and friends from the shadows, watching how they behaved when they thought he was gone forever. But Vincent understood that this experiment had potentially devastating consequences. If his suspicions were correct, he would lose everyone he cared about in a single, brutal revelation. If he was wrong, he would have put his loved ones through unnecessary anguish for the sake of his own paranoia. Either outcome would fundamentally change his life. The psychological preparation was almost as challenging as the logistical planning. Vincent had to mentally prepare himself to witness conversations he was never meant to hear, to see actions that would occur only in his absence. He had to accept that some truths, once discovered, could never be unknown. Have you ever wondered who would stick by your side if you lost everything? Vincent was about to find out in the most brutal way possible. But first, he had to disappear completely from a life that employed dozens of people whose job was to track his every movement. The plan required careful orchestration. Vincent would need to exit his own life so thoroughly that no one would think to look for him in the shadows of the city. He would need to become invisible while remaining close enough to observe. Most challenging of all, he would need to resist the urge to return to his comfortable life when the experiment became too painful to continue. What Vincent didn't realize was that his experiment would coincide with events that would test not just his friend's loyalty, but their fundamental character when everything he had built faced destruction. 3 weeks later, Vincent Blackwood vanished. Not kidnapped, not murdered, he simply disappeared from his own life. His assistant Priya received a cryptic message about a business retreat that would last indefinitely. His personal security team was dismissed with generous severance packages and strict confidentiality agreements. His credit cards were locked away in a safety deposit box. His phones were forwarded to voicemail systems that promised his return soon. But Vincent hadn't gone far. In fact, he had never left Manhattan. While his staff searched for clues about his mysterious retreat, Vincent was 3 blocks away in a cheap motel room, staring at himself in a cracked mirror and preparing for the most radical transformation of his life. The makeup artist Vincent hired was Regina Castellanos, a Hollywood professional who specialized in aging actors for period films. Regina had worked on dozens of movies where young actors needed to portray themselves across decades of life. She understood how to make someone truly unrecognizable, and more importantly, she understood the value of discretion. For $50,000 cash and a promise of future work, Regina agreed to transform Vincent Blackwood into someone his own mother wouldn't recognize. The process took 6 hours. Regina began by changing Vincent's bone structure using prosthetics and strategic makeup. She built up his cheekbones, altered the shape of his nose, and created deep lines around his eyes that aged him by 20 years. She changed his hairline, added gray to his temples, and created the kind of weathered complexion that comes from years of outdoor living. She taught him how to walk differently, with the slower, more deliberate gait of someone whose joints ached from sleeping on hard surfaces. But the physical transformation was only part of Vincent's preparation. He spent weeks learning how to blend into the invisible population of homeless individuals who lived in the shadows of his own city. He studied their patterns, their survival strategies, their unspoken rules. He learned which subway platforms provided warmth during cold nights, which police officers showed compassion versus those who showed contempt, and which neighborhoods offered the best opportunities for finding discarded food or spare change. The psychological preparation was perhaps more challenging than the physical transformation. Vincent had to unlearn 38 years of privilege, 38 years of assuming that comfort and safety were his birthright. He had to mentally prepare himself for hunger, real hunger, not the fashionable intermittent fasting he had practiced as a health trend. He had to accept that he would smell, that he would be dirty, that people would look through him as if he didn't exist. Vincent's first night on the streets taught him lessons that no amount of wealth could have prepared him for. He had chosen a spot near Washington Square Park, thinking that the student population would be more tolerant of his presence. He was wrong. College students hurried past him without making eye contact, restaurant workers shooed him away from their establishments, and police officers moved him along from anywhere he tried to rest. The cold was the first shock. October nights in New York can drop into the 40s, and Vincent's expensive outdoor gear had been replaced with a threadbare jacket found at a Salvation Army store. He had never experienced cold that penetrated his bones, cold that made his muscles ache and his teeth chatter uncontrollably. He found himself understanding why homeless individuals often sought warmth in subway stations, even when it meant risking arrest. But the cold was nothing compared to the hunger. Vincent had eaten his last meal as a billionaire 28 hours earlier. Now, sitting on a piece of cardboard behind a dumpster, he experienced hunger as a physical pain in his stomach, a weakness in his limbs, a constant distraction that made it difficult to think about anything else. He watched people exit restaurants carrying leftovers in containers and understood, for the first time, why someone might dig through garbage looking for food. The invisibility was perhaps the most psychologically challenging aspect of his transformation. Vincent Blackwood had spent decades being the most important person in any room he entered. People had competed for his attention, hung on his every word, anticipated his needs before he expressed them. Now, as Vincent the homeless man, he experienced the opposite extreme. People's eyes slid over him without recognition, conversations stopped when he approached, and his very presence seemed to make others uncomfortable. He tested this invisibility during his third day on the streets. Standing outside his own office building, he watched employees he had worked with for years walk past him without the slightest flicker of recognition. Priya, his assistant who knew his schedule better than he did, passed within 3 feet of him while talking on her phone about the mysterious circumstances of his disappearance. The security guard who had greeted him every morning for 5 years looked directly at him and saw nothing worth remembering. But Vincent's experiment wasn't just about experiencing homelessness, it was about surveillance. While living on the streets, he was simultaneously conducting the most sophisticated monitoring operation of his life. He had installed hidden cameras throughout the city, in places where his former life intersected with his new reality. His apartment building, his office, his favorite restaurants, his brother's law firm, Antonio's restaurant chain. Dozens of locations now had discreet recording equipment that would capture conversations and behaviors his friends and family never intended him to witness. The technology Vincent used was military-grade surveillance equipment, the kind used by intelligence agencies to monitor foreign diplomats. Cameras the size of buttons, microphones that could pick up conversations from 50 feet away, recording devices that could operate continuously for weeks without detection. Vincent had spent $200,000 on equipment that would allow him to watch his old life from the shadows of his new one. If you think Vincent's approach was extreme, consider what you would do to discover the truth about the people closest to you. How far would you go to know whether your relationships were built on love or financial interest? Vincent was about to find out, and the answers would be more devastating than he had imagined. The practical challenges of homeless life continued to shock Vincent daily. Finding a bathroom required strategic planning and often involved uncomfortable negotiations with business owners. Staying clean meant washing in public restrooms with handfuls of rough paper towels. Staying safe meant learning which areas of the city were dangerous for vulnerable populations and which offered relative security. Vincent learned that homeless individuals developed a complex social structure invisible to the general public. There were territories and hierarchies, alliances and conflicts, unspoken rules about sharing resources and information. He met individuals with advanced degrees who had lost everything to mental illness, addiction, or economic catastrophe. He met others who had been living on the streets for decades, who had created entire identities around their homelessness. One man, calling himself Brooklyn, had been homeless for 12 years after losing his job as a financial advisor. Brooklyn had an MBA from Columbia and could discuss market trends with the same sophistication as Vincent's investment team. But Brooklyn also suffered from bipolar disorder that made maintaining employment impossible, and his family had eventually stopped trying to help him. Brooklyn became Vincent's informal guide to street survival, though he never suspected that his newest companion was conducting an experiment rather than genuinely experiencing homelessness. Through Brooklyn, Vincent learned the locations where free meals were served, which shelters had available beds, and how to navigate the social services system. He learned which police officers would harass homeless individuals and which would offer genuine assistance. He learned the difference between people who gave money out of genuine compassion and those who did it to ease their own guilt. But most importantly, Vincent learned how quickly society forgets about people who fall through the economic cracks. He had been missing from his billionaire life for only 2 weeks, but he was already becoming invisible in his homeless existence. The contrast was staggering. One version of himself was desperately sought after, while the other version was actively avoided. During his second week on the streets, Vincent contracted a respiratory infection that left him coughing violently and running a fever. In his previous life, he would have called his personal physician, who would have made a house call within hours and prescribed the finest available medications. As a homeless man, Vincent waited 4 hours in a free clinic to see an overworked nurse practitioner who gave him generic antibiotics and advised him to rest in a warm, dry place, advice that was impossible to follow. The illness lasted 8 days and taught Vincent about the physical vulnerability that accompanies poverty. Without proper nutrition, medical care, or shelter, his body struggled to fight off an infection that would have been a minor inconvenience in his previous life. He understood why homeless individuals often appeared years older than their actual age. Poverty accelerated the aging process in ways that wealth had always protected him from experiencing. But Vincent's physical suffering was nothing compared to what he was about to witness through his hidden cameras. The surveillance footage from his first 2 weeks would reveal behaviors and conversations that would fundamentally alter his understanding of every important relationship in his life. Comment below if you've ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a double life, because what Vincent was about to see would make him question his judgment about human nature itself. The recording showed his world continuing without him, but not in the way he had expected. Instead of worry and concern, Vincent witnessed relief and celebration. Instead of search parties and desperate phone calls, he observed planning sessions and opportunistic schemes. The people who claimed to love him were adapting to his absence with suspicious ease. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment when Vincent discovered that his disappearance had triggered behaviors that revealed the true character of everyone he had trusted with his heart. The first betrayal came from an unexpected source. Vincent's younger brother Marcus, whom he had supported through law school, paid for his wedding, and given a $1 million loan to start his practice. Marcus had always been the family rebel, the one who claimed that money corrupted relationships and that true happiness came from authentic human connections. For 35 years, Vincent had believed that his brother was the one person who loved him unconditionally. Vincent's hidden cameras in Marcus's law office captured conversations that shattered that belief completely. 3 days after Vincent's disappearance, Marcus was already on the phone with Vincent's business rivals. But these weren't concerned inquiries about his brother's welfare, these were business negotiations. The first recorded conversation took place on October 18, just 72 hours after Vincent had vanished. Marcus sat in his downtown office, feet propped up on his desk in a posture of casual confidence that Vincent had never seen before. The call was to Theodore Zimmerman, CEO of Technova, SpanCorp's biggest competitor and Vincent's longtime business adversary. Marcus opened the conversation by saying, "Ted, I think we need to discuss my brother's recent absence. I have some information that might interest you." The casual tone was shocking enough, but what came next revealed a level of betrayal that Vincent hadn't anticipated. Marcus proceeded to detail confidential information about SpanCorp's upcoming product launches, information he could only have obtained through years of pretending to listen to Vincent's excited discussions about his work. Marcus knew about the company's financial vulnerabilities, its key patents, and its strategic plans for international expansion. He had been storing this information like ammunition, waiting for the right moment to use it. But the conversation revealed something even more devastating than corporate espionage. Marcus had been feeding information to competitors for over 2 years, long before Vincent's disappearance. The phone call Vincent was witnessing wasn't the beginning of his brother's betrayal, it was simply the most aggressive escalation. Theodore's voice came through the speakerphone clearly. "Marcus, you understand that this information could seriously damage your brother's company. Are you comfortable with that level of disloyalty?" Vincent held his breath, hoping that his brother would show some hesitation, some sign of conflict about betraying his family. Instead, Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. "Ted, let me explain something about my relationship with my brother. Vincent believes that his money makes him generous, but what he doesn't understand is that his generosity is actually a form of control. Every dollar he's given me came with invisible strings attached. Every favor came with unspoken expectations. I've been performing gratitude for decades, and frankly, I'm exhausted by it." The recording continued for 47 minutes, during which Marcus systematically dismantled every shared memory, every moment of family bonding, every expression of brotherly love that Vincent had cherished. Marcus described Vincent as narcissistic, controlling, and emotionally manipulative. He characterized Vincent's generosity as a calculated strategy to maintain power over his family members. But what Marcus said next would haunt Vincent forever. "Thank God he's finally gone. Do you know how exhausting it was pretending to care about my brother's pathetic need for approval? Every birthday party, every family dinner, every holiday gathering, I had to perform this role of the grateful younger brother who looked up to his successful sibling. The truth is, I've resented Vincent since we were children, and his money only made that resentment more complicated." Vincent, listening to this recording from his cardboard shelter behind a restaurant dumpster, felt a physical pain in his chest that had nothing to do with his respiratory infection. This was his brother, his only sibling, the person who had shared his childhood, who had been his best man, who had delivered that moving toast about family loyalty just weeks earlier. The conversation revealed that Marcus had been documenting every instance of Vincent's financial support, not out of gratitude, but out of legal strategy. Marcus had been building a case that Vincent's gifts constituted a pattern of financial control that could be challenged in court. He had been planning to sue his own brother for emotional manipulation and financial abuse. Marcus explained to Theodore. "Vincent thinks he's been generous, but legally, I can argue that his financial support was designed to create emotional dependence. I have documentation of every gift, every loan, every payment he's made on my behalf over the past 15 years. My lawyer believes we can make a case that Vincent used his wealth to manipulate my life choices and career decisions." The business intelligence that Marcus had gathered was even more comprehensive than Vincent had realized. Marcus knew about SpanCorp's research and development projects, its planned acquisitions, its vulnerability to cyber attacks, and its strategies for dealing with government regulation. He had been conducting corporate espionage against his own brother for years, using family dinners and casual conversations as opportunities to gather confidential information. But the personal revelations were more devastating than the business betrayals. Marcus told Theodore that he had been keeping a private journal documenting every perceived slight, every moment of feeling overshadowed by Vincent's success, every instance where Vincent's wealth had made Marcus feel inadequate. The journal contained 23 years of accumulated resentment, dating back to Vincent's first major business success. Marcus read several entries to Theodore over the phone, entries that revealed the depth of his long-concealed hatred. "Vincent gave me another check today, and as usual, he couldn't just hand it over quietly. He had to make a speech about family supporting family, about how success is meaningless unless you share it with people you love. What he really meant was that my success is meaningless unless he's financing it. He needs me to be grateful because my gratitude validates his self-image as a generous person." Another entry. "Vincent invited me to his charity gala again, where I'll be expected to smile and nod while he accepts applause for his philanthropy. The money he donates is less than he spends on wine in a typical year, but everyone treats him like a humanitarian. Meanwhile, I'm supposed to be proud of my brother's achievements, as if his success somehow reflects well on me. The truth is, his success makes my own accomplishments invisible. The recordings revealed that Marcus had been sharing these journal entries with Theodore for months, providing both personal insights into Vincent's psychology and strategic intelligence about his business decisions. Marcus had been betraying Vincent on multiple levels simultaneously, as a brother, as a confidant, and as a family member with access to confidential information. Comment below if you've ever been betrayed by family, because what's coming next is even worse. But Marcus's betrayal extended beyond business intelligence and emotional manipulation. The recordings revealed that he had been actively working to undermine Vincent's other relationships as well. Marcus had been feeding negative information about Vincent to other family members, to mutual friends, and even to Vincent's romantic interests. In one conversation with their elderly Aunt Catherine, Marcus planted seeds of doubt about Vincent's mental stability. "Aunt Cat, I'm worried about Vincent. His behavior has become increasingly erratic lately. He's been making impulsive business decisions, and his personal relationships seem unstable. I think the pressure of managing so much wealth might be affecting his judgment." These conversations were designed to create a narrative that would support Marcus's eventual legal challenges to Vincent's business decisions and financial arrangements. Marcus was systematically building a case that Vincent was mentally unfit to manage his own affairs, positioning himself as the concerned family member who might need to intervene for Vincent's own protection. The scope of Marcus's deception became clear through weeks of recorded conversations. He had been cultivating relationships with Vincent's employees, offering them future employment opportunities with competitor companies. He had been gathering information about Vincent's personal habits, his health concerns, and his private insecurities. He had been building a comprehensive dossier that could be used to damage Vincent's reputation and business interests. But perhaps most heartbreaking was discovering that Marcus had been sharing Vincent's private communications with Theodore's team. Vincent's personal emails, his private phone conversations, even his journal entries. Marcus had been photographing and recording everything he could access during family visits to Vincent's apartment. The brother who had delivered a tearful speech about family loyalty at Vincent's birthday party just months earlier was now celebrating his disappearance and planning to profit from his absence. Marcus had been performing the role of loving brother for decades while simultaneously building a case for destroying everything Vincent had created. If you think family betrayal is devastating, wait until you see what his closest friend did. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment that broke Vincent completely. But Vincent's surveillance system had captured something else that would prove even more devastating than his brother's betrayal. While Marcus was conducting business with Vincent's competitors, Vincent's best friend Antonio was hosting celebrations of Vincent's disappearance. The hidden cameras in Antonio's restaurant revealed gatherings that Vincent never could have imagined. These weren't prayer circles or search parties, they were parties celebrating Vincent's absence from their lives. Antonio Rivera had been Vincent's best friend since college. They had been roommates, best men at each other's weddings, godparents to each other's children. Antonio was the one person Vincent believed would never abandon him, the one relationship that predated wealth and success. If anyone's loyalty was genuine, it had to be Antonio's. Vincent had invested $12 million in Antonio's restaurant chain over the years. When Antonio's marriage fell apart, Vincent paid for the divorce lawyers without being asked. When Antonio's daughter needed surgery, Vincent covered every medical bill and flew in specialists from Europe. When Antonio's restaurant struggled during economic downturns, Vincent provided emergency funding that kept the entire chain afloat. But Vincent's hidden cameras in Antonio's flagship restaurant revealed a truth that shattered his understanding of their 20-year friendship. 2 weeks into Vincent's disappearance, Antonio threw a party. Not a search party or a prayer vigil, a celebration party specifically themed around Vincent's absence. The party took place on October 28, in the private dining room of Antonio's most successful restaurant. The invitation list included 37 people from Vincent's social circle, business associates, mutual friends, even some family members. The invitation itself, captured by Vincent's surveillance equipment, was telling: "Join us for a celebration of freedom from golden handcuffs. It's time to be honest about relationships built on financial obligation rather than genuine affection." Vincent watched the footage from his cardboard shelter, shivering in the October cold while his supposed best friend hosted a party celebrating his disappearance. The guests arrived dressed in expensive clothes that Vincent had helped them afford through various business deals and personal loans. They drank wine from Vincent's own collection, bottles that Antonio had borrowed from Vincent's cellar months earlier. The party's theme became clear as guests were encouraged to share stories about the burden of maintaining friendships with Vincent. A toast early in the evening set the tone. Antonio raised his glass and addressed the assembled crowd with words that would replay in Vincent's mind for years to come. "Friends, we're gathered here tonight to acknowledge something we've all felt but never said out loud. Vincent Blackwood was not our friend, he was our financial benefactor. And there's a crucial difference between those two relationships. Friends choose to spend time together because they enjoy each other's company. Financial beneficiaries spend time with their patron because they need to maintain access to resources." The crowd laughed and applauded, clearly relieved to finally express feelings they had been suppressing for years. Antonio continued, "Vincent thought his money bought him loyalty, but all it bought him was performance. We're all just tired actors who can finally drop the act." Guest after guest shared stories that recontextualized years of shared experiences. Events that Vincent had treasured as genuine moments of friendship were revealed to be calculated performances designed to maintain financial relationships. Birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, vacation trips, all of it had been endured rather than enjoyed. Rebecca Castellanos, whom Vincent had considered one of his closest female friends, shared a story about Vincent's 50th birthday party planning. "Do you remember how Vincent spent 3 months organizing that surprise party for his own birthday? He kept dropping hints about what he wanted, where he wanted it held, who he wanted invited. We all had to pretend to be surprised when everything was exactly as he had planned it. It was like being actors in a play where only one person knew the script." The crowd erupted in laughter, and Rebecca continued, "But the worst part was having to act grateful for his generosity. Vincent paid for everything, chose everything, controlled everything, and then expected us to be thankful for the privilege of attending his party. We were props in his performance of having friends who loved him." Another guest, Dr. Harrison Chen, whom Vincent had helped through medical school with a substantial loan, shared his perspective. "Vincent never let any of us forget his generosity. Every favor came with a story about how he was helping us achieve our dreams. But what he really wanted was credit for our successes. He needed to believe that our achievements were possible only because of his support." The stories continued for hours, each one revealing another layer of resentment that had been building for years. Vincent learned that his friends had been maintaining a private group chat called Vincent Management where they coordinated their interactions with him, shared strategies for managing his expectations, and warned each other about his moods and demands. The group chat, which Antonio read excerpts from during the party, contained thousands of messages spanning 3 years. Messages like, "Vincent is in one of his generous moods today, might be a good time to mention your car repairs." Or, "Vincent seemed annoyed that we didn't stay longer at his party last week, everyone needs to be extra appreciative for the next few gatherings." But the most devastating revelation came when Antonio shared Vincent's private journal entries. Vincent had never given Antonio access to his journal, but Antonio had been photographing pages during his visits to Vincent's apartment. Antonio had been sharing Vincent's most private thoughts with this group of people for over a year. Antonio read aloud from Vincent's journal. "Sometimes I wonder if my friends would still want to spend time with me if I lost everything tomorrow. The thought keeps me awake at night. I know I can be demanding, and I know my wealth creates complicated dynamics, but I hope the foundation of these relationships is genuine affection rather than financial dependence." The crowd found Vincent's private insecurities hilarious. They laughed at his vulnerability, mocked his need for reassurance, and ridiculed his hope that their relationships might be based on something deeper than money. Antonio added, "Vincent wrote this entry after my daughter's surgery. He was wondering if I would still be his friend if he hadn't paid for her medical care. The answer, obviously, is no. I'm grateful for his help, but gratitude isn't friendship." The party revealed that Vincent's friends had been documenting his behavior patterns, analyzing his psychological needs, and strategizing about how to maintain access to his resources while minimizing the emotional labor required to sustain the relationships. They had turned friendship into a business strategy. One guest, Patricia Wong, shared a detailed analysis of Vincent's personality. "Vincent needs constant validation because he fundamentally doesn't believe he's worthy of love without his money. So he creates these elaborate tests of loyalty, and then gets frustrated when people respond to his wealth instead of his character. But here's the thing, his character isn't particularly compelling. Remove the money, and Vincent is just an insecure man who needs more attention than most people are willing to give." The psychological insights his friends shared were devastatingly accurate, but they revealed a clinical detachment that made Vincent realize he had been a subject of study rather than a genuine friend. These people had analyzed his motivations, predicted his behaviors, and manipulated his emotional needs with scientific precision. Antonio's toast later in the evening revealed the depth of his long-concealed resentment. "Vincent called me his best friend, but what he really meant was that I was his most convincing performer. I've spent 20 years pretending to enjoy conversations about his business achievements, pretending to be impressed by his latest acquisitions, pretending to share his excitement about projects that mean nothing to me." The toast continued, "Vincent thought he was being generous when he invested in my restaurants, but what he was really doing was buying guaranteed access to my time and attention. Every dollar came with invisible strings attached. I couldn't make business decisions without his input. I couldn't plan family vacations without considering his schedule. I couldn't even choose my restaurant's menu without his suggestions." Antonio revealed that he had been keeping a detailed journal of his own, documenting every perceived slight, every moment of feeling controlled by Vincent's financial influence, every instance where Vincent's wealth had made normal friendship impossible. The journal contained 15 years of accumulated frustration and resentment. But perhaps most shocking was Antonio's revelation that he had been sharing Vincent's business secrets with other restaurant owners, information he had gathered during their private conversations about SpanCorp's corporate partnerships and expansion plans. Antonio had been using his friendship with Vincent to gain competitive advantages in the restaurant industry. The surveillance footage showed Antonio's guests staying until after midnight, sharing more stories, making more toasts, and generally celebrating their liberation from the burden of pretending.